The first-class cabin of Flight 1876 to Bali hummed with the quiet anticipation of a long journey. Passengers settled into plush seats, stowing designer bags and sipping complimentary drinks. But the air grew tense when Bethany Caldwell's voice sliced through the calm, sharp, and accusing. "That window seat is mine, and I want her removed now." Heads turned. All eyes fixed on a heavy-set woman in designer clothes, her manicured finger pointing at a teenage girl by the window. 16-year-old Zara Briam sat quietly, clutching her boarding pass, her face a mask of calm despite the venom directed at her. Zara's voice was steady. "This is my assigned seat, ma'am. I'm not leaving." Her words were polite but firm, the kind of composure that comes from years of navigating spaces where she wasn't always welcome. Bethany's face reddened, her eyes narrowing. "Do I look like I care? People like you don't belong in first class." The words landed like a slap, dripping with condescension. Nearby passengers shifted uncomfortably, some pretending not to hear, others stealing glances. Zara stayed silent, her gaze fixed on the window, but her grip on her boarding pass tightened. Bethany leaned closer, her voice a venomous whisper. "If you don't move, I'll have security drag you out." Before Zara could respond, Bethany's hand shot out, grabbing Zara's cheeks and pinching hard. A gasp rippled through the cabin. The young girl flinched but didn't cry out, her eyes locked on her reflection in the window, a face fighting to hold onto dignity under assault. Her fingers fumbled for her phone, texting her father, "Dad, there's a situation. Not dangerous, but bad. Please come back when you can." She hesitated, then saved the message to drafts. He was in a meeting. She could handle this. She had to. Zara wasn't just any teenager. A straight-A student, debate team captain, and volunteer at the Children's Hospital, she carried herself with a quiet confidence beyond her years. Her life was a whirlwind of advanced classes, piano recitals, and dinners alone, her father's empty chair a constant reminder of his absence. Xavier Briam, her father, was a man whose name commanded respect in circles most people never touched. At 47, he was one of the youngest division chiefs in FBI history, heading counterterrorism with an authority that made presidents listen. But to Zara, he was the father who missed birthdays, who promised time together only to be pulled away by a buzzing phone. This trip was supposed to be different. 2 weeks in Bali, just the two of them. No emergencies, no agents, no national crises. Xavier had looked her in the eyes and sworn it. "Just you and me, Zara." She'd seen the guilt in his gaze, the weight of years spent watching her grow up through photos. At the airport that morning, she'd let herself believe it might happen. They'd moved through security with the ease of wealth that didn't need to flaunt itself, matching Italian leather luggage, first-class tickets, a private villa waiting in Bali. But now, as Bethany's voice grew louder, Zara felt that hope slipping. The confrontation escalated. "Flight attendant." Bethany snapped, her hand waving as if summoning a servant. Madison, a seasoned attendant with a professional smile, appeared quickly. "How can I help, ma'am?" she asked, her tone calm but wary. Bethany pointed at Zara. "This girl is in my seat, and I want her gone. Do you know who my husband is?" "Raymond Caldwell, assistant director at the Department of Justice." The name drop was deliberate, a weapon she'd wielded before. Madison's smile didn't falter, but her eyes flicked to Zara, who handed over her boarding pass without a word. Madison checked the tickets. "Miss Briam is in her assigned seat, 3A. Miss Caldwell, your seat is 3C, the aisle." Bethany's face flushed crimson. "This is ridiculous. I always get a window seat." She leaned closer to Madison, her voice dropping to a hiss. "I refuse to sit next to her. Find her another seat, or I'll have your job." The threat hung heavy, and the cabin grew quieter, passengers now openly watching. A teenager a few rows ahead tilted his phone, the camera catching the scene. A woman in a business suit pretended to text, her phone recording. Zara stayed composed, but the words stung. She'd heard them before at her private school, at country clubs, in subtle glances and whispered comments. She knew the playbook. Stay calm, don't react, prove you belong. Her father had taught her that. But as Bethany's tirade continued, Zara's resolve wavered. She glanced at her phone again, the unsent message to her father staring back. She didn't want to need him, didn't want to be the girl who couldn't handle her own battles. But this wasn't just about a seat anymore. Unbeknownst to Zara, she wasn't entirely alone. 3 rows back, Agent Teresa Lopez, an FBI field officer on Xavier's security detail, watched the scene unfold. She'd recognized Zara immediately but stayed in cover, her hand already on her phone, typing a secure message to her team. "Situation with director's daughter. Racist passenger. Escalating. Lopez's eyes never left Bethany, assessing her like a potential threat. The agent's presence was invisible to the cabin, but her alertness was a coiled spring, ready to act if needed. Bethany, oblivious to the forces aligning against her, doubled down. "This is unacceptable," she shouted, turning to the captain, who had emerged from the cockpit to address the disturbance. Captain Michael Harrington, a 30-year veteran, took in the scene with a practiced eye. "What's the problem, ladies?" he asked, his voice calm but authoritative. Bethany seized the moment. "Captain, this girl stole my seat, and your staff is doing nothing. My husband runs the Justice Department. This kind of treatment won't stand." Madison quickly explained, verified tickets, assigned seats, Bethany's threats. The captain turned to Bethany. "Miss Caldwell, Miss Briam is in her correct seat. Our assignments are final." Bethany's frustration boiled over. "I don't feel safe next to her. As a taxpayer and the wife of a government official, I demand different accommodations." The words were a thinly veiled attack on Zara's race, and the cabin's tension spiked. Passengers exchanged glances, some filming openly now. Zara finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. "My father will be back soon. Please leave me alone until then." It wasn't a threat, just a fact, but it carried weight. Bethany scoffed, her laughter sharp and cruel. "Oh, I'm shaking. Who's your daddy? The janitor? The baggage handler?" She leaned closer, her voice dripping with mockery. "Listen, little girl, my husband can make people disappear with a phone call." The threat crossed a line, and Captain Harrington's expression hardened. "Miss Caldwell, threatening passengers is—" He was cut off by a shift in the cabin's atmosphere. A figure appeared at the front of first class, his presence commanding instant silence. Xavier Briam stood in the aisle, his suit impeccable, his gaze sweeping the scene with lethal precision. At 6 feet 2 inches, with the build of a man who trained daily, he didn't need to raise his voice. His authority was palpable, a force that reshaped the room. Passengers fell silent. Bethany froze, still unaware of the storm she'd summoned. Xavier's eyes locked onto his daughter, reading her posture, the controlled breathing, the tight grip on the armrest. He saw her strength, her restraint, and it both proud and enraged him. Then his gaze shifted to Bethany, and the air grew heavier. Something was coming, something unstoppable. The cabin held its breath, sensing the collision of two worlds, one built on entitled arrogance, the other on unyielding power. Whatever happened next would be unforgettable. Xavier Briam's presence in the first-class cabin was like a thunderhead rolling in, heavy with unspoken power. The hum of the aircraft faded as passengers sensed the shift, their eyes darting between the imposing man in the tailored suit and Bethany Caldwell, who still hadn't grasped the magnitude of her mistake. Her voice, shrill and indignant, carried on. "Captain, this is outrageous. My husband will hear about this, and heads will roll." She jabbed a finger toward Zara, who sat by the window, her composure a stark contrast to Bethany's unraveling. Xavier's gaze never wavered. He stood at the edge of row 3, his silence more commanding than any shout. Captain Harrington, recognizing the FBI counterterrorism chief from security briefings, straightened. "Director Briam," he said, his voice low with respect, "we're addressing a seating dispute involving your daughter. I apologize for the disturbance." The word director hit the cabin like a shockwave. Bethany's head snapped toward Xavier, confusion flickering in her eyes, but her entitlement held firm. "Director," she muttered, her tone caught between disbelief and defiance. She sized him up, her mind scrambling to reconcile this man with the power implied by the title. "This is still unacceptable. My husband, Raymond Caldwell, is assistant director at the Justice Department. He'll sort this out." Her voice wavered slightly, but she clung to her husband's name like a lifeline, unaware it was about to become her undoing. Xavier's expression remained unreadable, a skill honed through years of high-stakes interrogations. He reached into his jacket, withdrawing his FBI credentials. The shield glinted briefly under the cabin lights before he slipped it back into his pocket. The gesture was understated, almost casual, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. "Mrs. Caldwell," he said, his voice calm but edged with steel, "I believe you know my name, even if you don't recognize my face. Your husband certainly does." Bethany's face paled, the first crack in her armor. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her earlier bravado faltering. Xavier's next words were deliberate, each one landing like a hammer. "Raymond reports directly to me." The cabin fell silent, the kind of hush that follows a lightning strike. Passengers leaned forward, phones still recording, capturing every second of Bethany's world collapsing. Her mouth opened, then closed, her brain struggling to process the catastrophic miscalculation. That's not possible, she whispered, but her eyes betrayed her. She knew it was true. Raymond, her trump card, the man whose name she'd wielded to intimidate service workers and bend rules, answered to the father of the girl she'd just demeaned. Her gaze darted to Zara, who sat quietly, her dignity unshaken despite the assault on her character. The realization hit Bethany like a physical blow. Her power was an illusion, and she'd aimed it at the wrong target. Xavier's voice cut through the silence. I've heard everything you said to my daughter. Every word, every implication, every threat. His tone was measured, but the undercurrent of fury was unmistakable. Passengers froze, flight attendants stood still, and even the air seemed to hold its breath. Bethany's face turned ashen, sweat beading on her forehead despite the cabin's cool air. I didn't know she was your daughter, she managed, her voice barely audible. I would never have. Never have what? Xavier interrupted, his question sharp and unyielding. Never have demanded she be removed from her seat? Never have suggested she didn't belong in first class? Never have threatened the crew for doing their jobs? Each accusation was a precision strike, dismantling her excuses before she could voice them. Bethany shrank under his gaze, her designer scarf fluttering with her uneven breaths. The cabin watched, riveted, as the woman who'd strutted in with such arrogance now crumbled. Unseen by most, a subtle choreography unfolded. For passengers, Agent Teresa Lopez in row 6, Agent Marcus Chin by the window in row 7, Agent Daniela Rodriguez in the last row, and Agent Raj Patel near the galley, shifted in their seats. Their movements were imperceptible to the untrained eye, but their alertness synchronized with Xavier's presence. They were his team, hidden in plain sight, ready to act if the situation escalated beyond words. Lopez's fingers hovered over her phone, her latest message to the team reading, Director on scene. Stand by. Captain Harrington stepped in, his voice steady. Director Briam, given the nature of this incident, I can have Miss Caldwell removed from the flight if you deem it necessary. We prioritize passenger safety and comfort. The offer hung in the air, a guillotine blade poised to fall. Bethany's eyes widened, the prospect of being escorted off the plane in front of everyone, a humiliation that would go viral within hours, sinking in. Passengers with phones leaned closer, sensing the climax approaching. Zara, silent until now, glanced at her father. Her expression was complex, relief at his intervention, but also a flicker of resolve. She'd been handling this herself, and part of her wanted to prove she could. Her unsent text to him still sat in her drafts, a reminder of her hesitation to pull him from his work. But as she watched him now, his authority reshaping the cabin, she felt a mix of pride and something deeper, a recognition of the father who'd always been a distant hero, now standing firmly in her corner. Bethany seized the pause, her voice trembling with forced contrition. Director, I'm so sorry. This was a misunderstanding. I had no idea who you were. Her apology was desperate, aimed at Xavier, not Zara, as if the girl were incidental. Xavier's hand rose slightly, a minimal gesture that silenced her instantly. Mrs. Caldwell, he said, his voice low but resonant, the fact that Zara is my daughter is irrelevant. Your behavior would be unacceptable toward any passenger. The rebuke was surgical, exposing the rot of her prejudice without raising his voice. Bethany's face contorted, torn between resentment and fear. I apologize, she stammered, her eyes darting to the passengers filming her. I was out of line. The words were hollow, a performance to save face, but Xavier's gaze made it clear they weren't enough. Your apology isn't owed to me, he said, his tone unyielding. It's owed to my daughter. The directive was a masterstroke, forcing Bethany to confront the person she tried to erase. She turned to Zara, her expression a battlefield of humiliation and defiance. I'm sorry for how I spoke to you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. It was inappropriate. The apology was grudging, lacking any acknowledgement of the racism that fueled her outburst. Zara met her gaze, her nod brief and neutral, neither accepting nor rejecting the words, just acknowledging they'd been said. Xavier's silence spoke volumes. The apology was inadequate, and everyone knew it. Madison, the flight attendant, stepped forward, her professional demeanor intact despite the tension. Director, we can reseat Miss Caldwell in economy, if that's acceptable. Bethany's face crumpled at the suggestion, the loss of her first-class status a final blow to her ego. But she said nothing, recognizing that resistance would only deepen her hole. As Madison prepared to escort Bethany away, a second flight attendant approached, whispering about an elderly passenger in economy struggling with legroom due to a recent surgery. Madison turned to Xavier. "Director, would you object if we offered Miss Caldwell's seat to this passenger?" A faint smile ghosted across Xavier's face, gone as quickly as it appeared. "That would be an excellent solution," he said. The cabin watched as Bethany gathered her Louis Vuitton bag, her movements slow and defeated. She followed Madison down the aisle, her head bowed, the weight of her humiliation palpable. In her place, an elderly woman with a cane shuffled into first class, her face lighting up with disbelief at the unexpected upgrade. The symmetry was perfect, a quiet justice that resonated with every passenger who'd witnessed the scene. Xavier took his seat beside Zara, the immediate crisis resolved, but the emotional undercurrent still heavy. The agents throughout the cabin relaxed, their presence fading back into the background. Father and daughter sat in silence, the weight of what had happened settling between them. Zara broke the quiet, her voice soft. "You didn't have to do all that. I could have handled it." Xavier's eyes softened. "I know you could have," he said. "You were handling it with more grace than I might have at your age. But you shouldn't have to face that alone. Not when I'm here." The words carried a promise, one Zara wanted to believe but had learned to question. As the plane taxied toward the runway, the confrontation's echoes lingered, setting the stage for a deeper reckoning between father and daughter, one that would unfold far beyond the confines of the cabin. The cabin of Flight 1876 settled into an uneasy calm as the plane taxied toward the runway. Bethany Caldwell was gone, relegated to a middle seat in economy, her designer bag a mocking reminder of the status she'd clung to. In her place, an elderly woman with a cane now sat in 3C, her grateful smile a quiet counterpoint to the ugliness that had unfolded. Passengers stole glances at Zara and Xavier Briam, the father and daughter at the heart of the storm, their phones still poised to capture any further drama. But the air had shifted, tension replaced by a collective awe at the justice they'd witnessed. Zara stared out the window, her reflection flickering against the tarmac lights. Her composure hadn't wavered, but inside, emotions churned. Relief, yes, but also a tangle of pride and frustration. She'd held her own against Bethany's venom, proving she could stand firm. Yet her father's intervention, while protective, reminded her of how often she'd faced such moments alone. His presence now was a comfort, but it also stirred the ache of years when his work had claimed him instead. Xavier sat beside her, his suit still impeccable, his posture relaxed but alert. His silence wasn't detachment. It was the quiet of a man processing what he'd just seen. His daughter targeted, her dignity tested, her strength shining through. He'd spent his career neutralizing threats, but this one, personal, rooted in prejudice, cut deeper than any intelligence briefing. His restraint in the confrontation had been deliberate, a choice to wield power with precision rather than fury. But the cost of that restraint weighed on him now. "You could have had her kicked off," Zara said suddenly, her voice low, meant only for him. "Everyone saw what she did. Why didn't you?" Her question wasn't accusatory, but it carried a teenage directness, probing for the reasoning behind his choice. Xavier turned to her, his gaze steady but warm, the kind reserved for moments when he was just her dad, not Director Briam. "Power isn't about what you can do, Zara," he said. "It's about what you choose not to do when you have every reason to act." Kicking her off would have been easy, satisfying even, but it wouldn't have changed her. It would have just made her a martyr in her own mind. His words were measured, each one chosen to teach as much as to explain. Letting her sit in economy, knowing she misjudged everything. That's a lesson that stings longer. Zara nodded, absorbing his words, but her expression betrayed a flicker of skepticism. She'd heard his principles before, seen them in action through news clips or overheard phone calls. But this was different. This was personal. "It still doesn't feel fair," she admitted. "She said those things, and she gets to just keep going? What if she does it again to someone else?" Xavier leaned back, his eyes tracing the cabin's ceiling as if searching for the right response. "You're right. It's not fair. People like her often skate through life, thinking their status shields them. But today, she didn't. She faced consequences, maybe not as dramatic as you'd like, but real. Her husband's getting a call right now. Her world's smaller than it was an hour ago." He paused, meeting her gaze. "And you? You showed her what dignity looks like. That's not nothing. The plane's engines roared as it lifted off, the ground falling away. The cabin lights dimmed, and passengers settled in, but the Briam's conversation felt like its own world. Zara's fingers traced the edge of her armrest, her mind turning over his words. "You always talk about restraint," she said. "But what about when it's not enough? When people keep acting like that because no one stops them?" Her question hit a nerve, one Xavier had wrestled with in his career and as a father. He'd built his life on calculated decisions, when to act, when to wait, when to let consequences unfold naturally. But Zara's challenge forced him to confront the limits of that philosophy, especially when it came to her. "Sometimes you have to act," he conceded. "But the when and how matter. If I'd had her removed, it would have been about me, not you. I wanted her to see you, your strength, your right to be here." Zara's lips pressed into a thin line, not fully convinced but willing to let it sit. She glanced at the clouds now visible outside, their soft edges a stark contrast to the sharp edges of the confrontation. "I just don't want to keep proving I belong," she said, her voice quieter now, almost lost in the hum of the plane. Not to her, not to anyone. Xavier's chest tightened. He knew that feeling, not from her perspective, but from his own years as a black man rising through the FBI's ranks, where every promotion came with whispers of quotas or favoritism. He'd taught Zara to navigate those spaces, to carry herself with unassailable confidence. But hearing her voice that exhaustion, that quiet wish to simply be, made him question how much he'd asked of her. "You shouldn't have to," he said, his tone softer but resolute. "And I'm sorry you do. But you're not just proving it to people like her. You're proving it to yourself. Every time you stand your ground, you're building something no one can take away." He reached over, squeezing her hand briefly. "I saw that today." Everyone did. Zara didn't pull away, but she didn't respond either. The weight of his words settled over her, mingling with the hum of the engines. She thought of Bethany's face, smug, then shattered, and the passengers who'd watched, some filming, some whispering. She wondered what they'd seen in her, a victim, a fighter, or just a girl caught in someone else's prejudice. The thought lingered, unresolved. Unseen by Zara, Agent Teresa Lopez, seated 3 rows back, kept her eyes on her book, but her attention was on the Briams. Her phone buzzed with a secure message from Agent Chun, directors handling it. No further action needed. Lopez nodded to herself, impressed by Xavier's restraint. She'd seen him dismantle threats with a single phone call, but today he'd chosen a different path, one that protected his daughter while exposing Bethany's flaws to the world. It was a masterclass in power, and Lopez filed it away as a lesson. In economy, Bethany sat wedged between 2 passengers, her face a mask of humiliation. Her phone lay untouched in her lap. She hadn't dared check it, knowing Raymond's response would be waiting. The call Xavier had mentioned would have reached him by now, and she could imagine his fury, not at her prejudice, but at the risk to his career. She stared at the seat back in front of her, replaying every word she'd said, each one a nail in her own coffin. The passengers around her whispered, some recognizing her from the first-class drama. She felt their eyes, their judgment, and it burned. Back in first class, Captain Harrington approached Xavier during a quiet moment. "Director, I've informed the crew to monitor Miss Caldwell for the rest of the flight. If there's anything else you need, just say the word." His tone was professional, but carried a hint of admiration. Xavier nodded. "Thank you, Captain. I trust your team has it handled." The exchange was brief, but it underscored the unspoken respect Xavier commanded, even among those outside his chain of command. As the flight leveled off, the cabin settled into routine, drinks served, screens flickering with movies. But for Zara and Xavier, the journey was just beginning. Their conversation had cracked open something deeper, a chance to bridge the gaps his career had carved between them. "Dad," Zara said, her voice tentative, "do you think she'll change? Bethany, I mean. Or will she just be angry?" Xavier considered this, his mind drifting to the countless times he'd seen prejudice confronted, sometimes shifting, sometimes hardening. "People don't change overnight," he said. But today, she saw consequences. That's a start. Whether she learns from it depends on her. He paused, then added, "What matters is you. How you carry this." Zara nodded, her gaze returning to the window. The clouds stretched endlessly, a reminder of the world beyond the cabin, a world where she'd face more Bethanus, more battles. But for now, She had her father beside her, and that felt like enough. As the plane soared toward Bali, the promise of their 2 weeks together hung in the air, fragile but real. The confrontation was over, but its lessons were just beginning to take root. The hum of Flight 1870 SIXS engines filled the first-class cabin as the plane cruised at 35,000 feet, the tension of the earlier confrontation now a lingering undercurrent. Passengers sipped drinks and flipped through magazines, but their glances still drifted to Zara and Xavier Briam. The father and daughter sat in a bubble of quiet, the weight of their earlier exchange settling into something deeper, more personal. Outside, clouds glowed faintly under the moonlight, a serene backdrop to the emotional turbulence within. Zara leaned against the window, her boarding pass still tucked in her hand, a small anchor to the reality of her seat. Her composure hadn't cracked, but her mind replayed the scene: Bethany's venom, the cabin's stairs, her father's commanding presence. She felt stronger for it, yet the sting of being targeted lingered. "Dad," she said, her voice soft but deliberate. "How do you keep doing it? Dealing with people like her, I mean. Doesn't it ever get heavy?" Xavier turned to her, his expression softening in a way few outside their family ever saw. He'd faced prejudice his entire career, subtle slights in boardrooms, pointed questions about his qualifications, the constant need to prove he belonged. But hearing Zara ask, knowing she was already navigating that same weight at 16, hit him hard. "It's heavy every time," he admitted. "But you learn to carry it. Not because it's fair, but because letting it stop you gives them the win." She nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of her armrest. "I tried to do that today. Stay calm, like you taught me." But it felt like she didn't even see me, just what she wanted to see. Her voice held a quiet frustration, the kind that comes from being reduced to a stereotype. Xavier's jaw tightened. He'd taught her resilience, but he hated that she needed it so young. "You're right," he said. "People like Bethany build their world on assumptions. They don't see you. They see their own fears, their own need to feel superior. But you made her see you today, Zara. Your strength, your dignity. That's what shook her." He paused, his voice dropping. "And it's what made me prouder than I can say." Zara's lips curved slightly, a rare glimpse of the girl beneath her poised exterior. "You were kind of intense back there," she said, a hint of teasing in her tone. "I thought she was going to faint when you said her husband works for you." Xavier chuckled, the sound low and warm. "I won't lie, part of me wanted her to squirm a little more. But that's not the point. The point was you." Their conversation flowed easily now, a bridge forming over the gaps his absences had left. In economy, Bethany Caldwell sat hunched in her middle seat, her face a mask of resentment and fear. The passengers around her whispered, some pointing discreetly, their phones likely already sharing clips of her humiliation. Her phone buzzed with a message from Raymond. "What did you do? Call me now." She didn't open it. The reality of her husband's anger and the potential fallout for his career pressed down on her like a physical weight. Bethany replayed her words, each one a misstep she couldn't undo. She'd always used Raymond's name to get her way: free upgrades, priority service, apologies from those who dared cross her. But today, that weapon had backfired spectacularly. Xavier Briam wasn't just her husband's boss. He was a force she couldn't charm or intimidate. Her stomach churned at the thought of Raymond's next conversation with him, the career he'd worked years to build now at risk because of her. In first class, Agent Teresa Lopez glanced up from her book, her eyes briefly meeting Agent Chen's across the cabin. Their subtle nod confirmed the situation was under control. Lopez admired Xavier's handling of the incident. His restraint had turned Bethany's outburst into a lesson without escalating to chaos. She typed a quick update to the team. Caldwell receded. No further issues. Director and daughter stable. The agents resumed their cover, blending seamlessly into the cabin's rhythm. Captain Harrington made a discreet pass through first class, checking on the elderly woman now in Bethany's former seat. She beamed, thanking him profusely for the unexpected comfort. Harrington nodded, then approached Xavier. "Director, everything's settled. Miss Caldwell's been quiet in economy, and we'll keep an eye on her. Anything else you need?" Xavier shook his head. "You've handled it well, Captain." "Thank you." The exchange was brief but carried mutual respect, a quiet acknowledgement of authority on both sides. As the flight attendants began meal service, Zara and Xavier's conversation turned to Bali. "What's the first thing we're doing when we land?" she asked, her tone lighter, daring to hope this trip might live up to its promise. Xavier smiled, a genuine warmth breaking through his usual reserve. "Breakfast on the beach. There's a place near the villa with fresh mango smoothies and views that'll make you forget DC exists." Zara's eyes lit up. "No phone calls? No briefings?" "None," he said firmly. "I told my team, short of a national emergency, they handle it. This is our time." His words were a vow, but Zara's smile was cautious. She'd heard promises like this before, only to watch him vanish into a secure call or jet off to a crisis. Still, something in his voice felt different this time, a resolve she wanted to trust. Their talk shifted to smaller things, her debate team's latest win, his attempt to master her favorite jazz playlist. It was the kind of conversation they rarely had, unhurried and unguarded. But beneath it, Zara wrestled with a question she hadn't voiced: how to balance her strength with the exhaustion of constantly proving herself. Xavier sensed it, reading her the way he read threats, instinctively, thoroughly. "You don't have to have all the answers now," he said, as if hearing her thoughts. "You're 16. You're allowed to be a kid, to make mistakes, to figure it out. But know this, you're already stronger than most people I've met, and I'm not just saying that because I'm your dad." Zara rolled her eyes, but her smile betrayed her. "You're biased," she teased. "Maybe," he conceded, "but I've seen you in action. You're going to change the world, Zara, and I'm going to be there to watch it." The words landed with weight, a promise not just for Bali, but for the years ahead. Zara didn't respond, but she leaned a little closer to him, the gesture saying what words couldn't. In economy, Bethany's thoughts spiraled. She imagined the conversations waiting for her, Raymond's colleagues, their social circle, the inevitable whispers. Her humiliation wasn't just public, it was permanent, etched into the videos passengers were already uploading. She clutched her bag, her knuckles white, and vowed to salvage what she could. But deep down, she knew something had cracked: her certainty, her untouchability, her belief that the world would always bend to her. As the plane soared toward Bali, the cabin settled into a rhythm, but the Briam's journey was far from over. The confrontation had exposed raw truths about prejudice, power, and the fragile bond between father and daughter. Zara felt the weight of her father's words, his belief in her, and it steadied her. Xavier, meanwhile, made a silent vow. No more missed moments, no more letting his work steal what mattered most. The path ahead was uncertain, but for now, they had this flight, this conversation, and the promise of 2 weeks to rebuild what time had eroded. The first-class cabin of Flight 1876 glowed softly under dimmed lights, the steady hum of the engines a backdrop to the quiet rhythm of long-haul travel. Passengers dozed or scrolled through screens, but for Zara and Xavier Briam, the journey felt like a turning point. The confrontation with Bethany Caldwell was hours behind them, yet its echoes lingered in their conversation, weaving through the words they shared as the plane carried them closer to Bali. Outside, the sky was a velvet expanse, stars scattered like promises waiting to be kept. Zara leaned back in her seat, her earlier tension softened by the warmth of her father's presence. Their talk had drifted from heavy truths to lighter moments: her plans for college, his embarrassing attempt to join her TikTok dance challenge last Christmas. But beneath these, a question simmered in her mind. She turned to him, her voice low but direct. "Dad, what happens when we land? With Bethany, I mean. Will she just go back to being like that?" Xavier's gaze settled on her, thoughtful. He'd spent his career analyzing human behavior, predicting outcomes, but this was personal. "People like Bethany don't change easily," he said. "Her kind of prejudice runs deep, built on years of thinking she's above others." But today shook her. She saw consequences, real ones. Whether she learns from it depends on her, but she'll carry this lesson for a while. He paused, his tone softening. "What matters more is you. How you move forward." Zara nodded, her fingers brushing the edge of her boarding pass, still tucked in her pocket. "I keep thinking about what you said, about dignity, about proving my worth. It's just exhausting sometimes. I don't want to spend my life fighting to belong." Her voice was steady, but the vulnerability in it pierced Xavier. He'd faced the same battles, but seeing his daughter shoulder them at 16 stirred a protective ache he couldn't ignore. "You won't always have to fight," he said, his words firm but gentle. "The world's changing, slowly. And you're part of that change. Every time you stand up, like you did today, you make it harder for people like her to keep their blind spots. But I hear you, it's heavy. And I'm here to carry some of that with you." He reached over, his hand resting briefly on hers. "Not just today. From now on. Zara's eyes met his, searching for the certainty she'd learned to doubt. His promises had often come with caveats, urgent calls, sudden trips, the weight of national security. But this time, his voice carried a conviction that felt new, unyielding. She wanted to believe it, and for the first time in years, she let herself. "You mean it?" she asked, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I do," Xavier said, his tone resolute. "I've already told my team. No calls, no briefings, nothing short of a catastrophe pulls me away. These 2 weeks are ours, Zara. And beyond that, I'm done letting work steal our time." The words were a vow, not just to her but to himself. He'd missed too much, recitals, debates, quiet evenings that could have been theirs. Today's confrontation had crystallized it. No mission was worth losing his daughter's trust. In economy, Bethany Caldwell sat rigid, her face a mask of forced composure. The passengers around her had stopped whispering, but their glances lingered, a reminder of her fall. Her phone buzzed again, another message from Raymond, likely furious, but she couldn't bring herself to read it. The reality of her actions pressed down harder with every mile. She'd humiliated herself, endangered her husband's career, and exposed her prejudice to a plane full of strangers, many of whom had recorded it. The videos were probably online already, her name trending for all the wrong reasons. Bethany's mind raced, grasping for a way to spin this, to salvage her reputation. She could claim a misunderstanding, blame the stress of travel. But deep down, she knew the truth. She'd misjudged everything. Xavier Briam wasn't just powerful, he was untouchable, a man who dismantled her with words alone. And Zara, the girl she dismissed, had faced her with a strength Bethany couldn't comprehend. For the first time, a crack formed in her certainty, a faint question about the world she'd built on entitlement. Back in first class, Agent Teresa Lopez closed her book, her role as silent observer complete. She exchanged a glance with Agent Chin, their unspoken agreement clear. The director had handled it flawlessly. Lopez admired the way Xavier had turned the incident into a lesson, not just for Bethany but for everyone watching. Her final message to the team was brief: situation resolved. No further action. Bali detail on schedule. The agents faded back into their cover, their presence a quiet reassurance for Xavier and Zara. Captain Harrington made one last pass through the cabin, checking on the elderly woman in 3C. She was asleep, her cane propped beside her, a faint smile on her face. He nodded to Xavier, a silent acknowledgement of a job well done. The crew had resumed their routine, but the story of the confrontation was already spreading among them, a tale of justice they'd retell for years. As the flight neared its end, Zara and Xavier's conversation turned to Bali's promise: temples to explore, beaches to wander, moments to reclaim. "I want to try surfing," Zara said, her eyes bright with anticipation. "You think you can keep up?" Xavier laughed, the sound rare and genuine. "I'll try. But if I wipe out, you're not posting it online." Their banter felt like a gift, a glimpse of the connection they'd both missed. The plane began its descent, the cabin stirring with the rustle of seatbelts and stowed trays. Zara looked out at the approaching lights of Bali, a new resolve settling in her. Today had tested her, but it had also shown her strength, not just hers, but her father's. She felt the weight of his promise, the possibility of a relationship rebuilt. "Thanks, Dad," she said quietly, almost to herself, "for showing up." Xavier's expression softened, his hand squeezing hers. "Always, Zara. I'm done being the guy who's only there in pictures." The words sealed something between them, a commitment to the days ahead. As the plane touched down, the Briam stepped into Bali with a shared purpose, not just a vacation, but a chance to mend what time had strained. In the weeks that followed, their trip unfolded as promised. Father and daughter explored ancient temples, laughed over failed surf lessons, and shared quiet dinners by the ocean. Xavier's phone stayed silent, his team honoring his directive. For Zara, it was a taste of the father she'd always longed for, not Director Briam, but Dad. Their bond grew stronger, rooted in the lessons of that flight: dignity under fire, the power of restraint, the value of presence. Bethany's fate was less kind. The videos from the flight went viral, her name synonymous with entitled prejudice. Raymond faced scrutiny at work, his advancement stalled by the shadow of her actions. She retreated from her social circle, the cracks in her worldview widening as she grappled with a world that no longer bent to her will. For Zara, it was a distant footnote, a reminder that justice, when it comes, can be quiet but profound. As Xavier and Zara stood on their villa's deck one evening, the ocean stretching endlessly before them, she asked, Do you think we'll ever stop fighting those battles? He considered it, his answer honest. Maybe not, but we'll fight them together. She smiled, the stars above them a map of possibilities. For the first time, Zara believed him.